Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Yapping with Yucca podcast. My name is Sophia. I'll be your host today. I'll pass it to my guests today to introduce themselves.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Zoe. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm Yucca's communications manager.
Hi, folks. My name's Ennedith Lopez. I use she, her, ella pronouns, and at the moment, I am doing the policy lead work.
Yay. I'll pass it to Felicia on Zoom.
Hi everyone, my name is Feleecia Guillen. I use she, her, ella, ella pronouns, and I'm a steering committee member with Youth United for Climate Crisis Action.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. We are Yucca, Youth United for Climate Crisis Action. We are an organization based in so-called New Mexico, doing climate justice work. And I want to just kind of open it up, talk about what do we do? Tell the people, what do we do, guys?
So I would say a lot of the work we do is centered around like a few different buckets of work. So I feel like we do a lot of policy work. We do work around direct action, like organizing and base building work, and then communications work as well to really urge elected officials and people in power across our state to take bold action on the climate crisis and really push for the bold solutions that we need that we haven't been seeing over the past years to address the climate emergency.
Yeah, and I would add that in 2019, Yucca started on this climate emergency campaign, trying to get Governor Michelle Lujan to declare climate emergency and also allocate the necessary funds to kickstart a just and equitable transition, which we can explain in a bit.
Mhm.
Um, but really, like Yucca does urge elected officials, but we also have a lot of programming dedicated to building youth leadership, on around political education, and really trying to get people to act on the climate crisis, whether that looks like organizing with your friends in your neighborhood, being a part of the political process, or even disrupting things as usual. We emphasize that there's space for everyone in the environmental and climate justice movement.
Felicia, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think Zoe and Ennedith did a great job of explaining, a lot of Yucca work. I'm currently tuning in from Washington, D.C., currently working for the Institute of Policy Studies as a New Mexico fellow. And I think, the more I settle into this role, the more I realize that now more than ever, Yucca's work is so, so important. And, a lot of us are frontline community members who are bearing the brunt of the climate crisis. And therefore, a lot of the actions that we're taking, a lot of the solutions that we want to see, it needs to be led by us. Because, I think on the larger climate movement is a bit disconnected from frontline communities. And so, just realizing that here in New Mexico, we have the core responsibility of shaping the narrative and really moving the work that frontline communities want to see. So yeah, that's like I think a huge part of our work and something that we need to elevate more, especially in the national climate movement, because a lot of people, are in urban areas and are a bit disconnected from frontline realities. And so I think, bringing our lived experience, uplifting our frontline experiences is a core and vital part of Yucca's role.
Yeah, thank you. I'd ask also, Felicia, if you could explain for folks what frontline means. Like, what do we mean when we say frontline communities and frontline experiences?
Yeah, so for me, frontline communities are communities who bear the brunt of the climate crisis, whether that's, they live right next to oil and gas extraction, whether, like, for example, Rio folks who, just experienced a lot of flooding in the past few weeks. These are the people and these are the communities that the climate crisis is having the most disproportionate impacts on, and really, forcing people from their traditional homelands to either like move away from their homelands or they're really just being forced out because the climate crisis is having, huge impacts on their very way of living. And so that's how I define frontline communities. I don't know if anyone else has a different perspective on that, but
I would also add like folks who live downwind from military bases just because of the environmental exposure, the testing, and the fallout that they tend to be in proximity to. I would consider those folks to be frontline groups as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so a lot of our work is like we really aim to highlight those voices because New Mexico is an oil and gas state, right? Our state economy is very much dependent on this industry that we know is destroying the planet and that we know is causing climate change. Not only is causing climate change, right, on a global level because of carbon dioxide emissions, but also, like Felicia was talking about, like people have to live right next to oil and gas wells. And there's little to no protections for those folks, and so that's a huge part of our work. Most of our membership and our staff live in urban areas in Albuquerque and Santa Fe. So I think it's our role because we were privileged to not live on those frontline spaces right near oil and gas extraction to highlight those voices and to bring the legislature like, "Hey, like, this is our communities, this is who you're serving, like, you need to listen to us." And I think we also have a specific role as young people, right? Like, our whole lives, it's like climate change is destroying the world, global warming, the end of the world, you know? And we're the ones who are gonna have to live with the consequences of the state of climate change and emissions. Um, so yeah, I think that's a really good summary of Yucca's work. We are only a 6-year-old organization almost. And we're, doing this what does everyone say all the time? Building the plane as we fly it. So, that's a little bit about our work. Today we wanted to talk about one of our campaigns called the People's Climate Plan. Um, Ennedith, can you explain what the People's Climate Plan is?
Yes, and I am looking for the definition of a just transition because we just got a training from folks who
Yeah.
essentially help kickstart that movement. So I'll explain that in a bit. But, it kind of encompasses the People's Climate Plan in the sense that this is a campaign that we started planning around, I would say, about 2 years ago. And so the idea was to essentially bring an ambitious climate bill, right? Like that's the end goal is to bring a fairly ambitious climate bill that encapsulates what New Mexicans want to see for a just transition in New Mexico. And not only a just transition, but to address the environmental and climate impacts that they may have seen. Um, and having the resources to address those things. And so the idea of the People's Climate Plan campaign really started out of this frustration of being a part of these policy processes and not necessarily you having space for your voice to be heard and for your experiences to be heard. And also because, when it comes to like state officials or official entities or agencies, a lot of times when they do community consultation, it's really just kind of treated as something that you check off the list
Mhm.
rather than taking it seriously as to, okay, this is what people who live here want to see happen,
Right.
and this is how we're going to do it. The way it's been treated, and really the frustration is that the community consultation isn't being done adequately or intentionally. So, really, what we're seeing is just this idea of like, you know, having these town hall series or having these presentations done by official state agencies and then just telling people what the plan is instead
Mhm.
of them actually being receptive to the plan.
Mhm.
So, the idea was like, F that, if the state isn't going to take New Mexicans' voices and perspectives seriously, we're just going to do it ourselves.
Mhm.
So that was kind of the orientation of the People's Climate Plan campaign. And it was really around this idea that, yes, there is a climate emergency. Yes, this is what people are facing. And this is what we need to address it and to ensure that we have a just and equitable transition. And so I'm going to pull up the definition because it's really important and central to the People's Climate Plan. A just transition is a principle, a process, and a practice. And this is coming from the Just Transition Alliance that is based in Chula Vista, San Diego, which is also a frontline community. And so the principle of a just transition is that a healthy economy and a clean environment can and should it coexist. The process for achieving this vision should be a fair one that should not cost workers or community residents their health, environment, jobs, or economic assets. Any losses should be fairly compensated. The practice of just transition means that people who are most affected by pollution, frontline workers, and fence-line communities should be in the leadership of crafting policy solutions. It really encompasses the idea that those who are closest to the issue are also closest to the solution.
Right. Yeah. So I think when we talk about a just transition, um, that's a term that is important for folks to understand, and thank you for explaining that. We talk like just like as in justice, like because the transition needs to happen, but it's not gonna happen fast, and it needs to happen, like you said, with the people who are most affected. We started kind of working on this campaign through our youth fellowship last summer. Feleecia, do you want to talk about the fellowship and what we did and how we started on the campaign?
Yeah, so last summer, back in 2024, it feels like this was a decade ago, but it's only a year ago. Um, I think one of the unique opportunities of Yucca is that, we bring in a diverse group of young people to come in, learn a lot of different resources or learn a lot of different strategies, tactics, um, and resources and tools that they can apply to their organizing, and we compensate them for that. And so last summer, I think, brought in, it was closer to 20 young people into Yucca to ultimately develop the People's Climate Plan, which was really awesome. We had different buckets of work from, including a ¿cómo se dice? Including like social media and comms to, more policy driven stuff, to more education, and like direct action. So I think those were like our four main like buckets of work. But ultimately, these young people were able to develop a work plan ultimately for themselves and for the campaign that led up to September for the Global Climate Strike Week. And so I believe this fellowship started in June and lasted all the way to September. And so all summer we were basically organizing and educating ourselves as well on how to develop this campaign. And so we developed a community survey that we distributed widely across the community to really understand where people are at when they think about the climate crisis and when they think about the harm in their community. I think one of the huge parts of this campaign as well for me is like, you know how do we educate our everyday folks on the impacts of the climate crisis? Like they may not necessarily draw the lines in a clear way, but they recognize that the air isn't clean, that there's something wrong with their water.
Mhm.
But they don't necessarily correlate it with the climate crisis or, the fossil fuel industry or industry in general just causing havoc in our communities. And so that's like a huge goal of the campaign and something that we seeked to find out in our People's Climate Plan survey, which will be linked down below. And if you live in New Mexico, you should definitely take the survey. Um, and so, we wrote this huge survey, which is very comprehensive and seeks to really understand a wide variety of things. And so, yeah, this is still ongoing. We see this campaign as kind of like a 5-year campaign, which I think is important to note. Because I think in our brains, we're like, okay, yeah, like let's do a lot of groundwork during the summer. Let's, host an action during the Global Climate Week. And then let's present some sort of bill in the 2026 or 2025 legislative session. And in reality, that just doesn't work, right? Especially in New Mexico, where industry is really prominent in our communities and our families. It takes a lot of time to do a lot of that groundwork to educate our families, to educate our young people, to educate our elders as well. And so all summer was basically just building the foundation for this campaign. We developed this podcast, which I think was really big. It's really starting the conversation. And we just come on here to yap, really. That's why it's called the Yapping with Yucca podcast. Like, you know, all of us in Yucca have really great ideas and really great thoughts. And so having this platform to just share the work that we're doing, and also talk about a lot of other things, um, was like vital to the campaign. Um, I'm trying, I don't know, we did a lot of direct actions, which I don't think we should go necessarily into detail. But a lot of it, was shutting down really bad things from happening, which was really great. But once again, I think just setting the foundation for the campaign and what it could do in the future. I think, in my perspective, everything that Yucca does falls under this campaign, whether it was all the work that we did in the legislative session, whether it was, a lot of direct actions that we did this past summer. We went to schools and we did workshops with them on various things, whether that was, poetry, and the importance of like sharing your voice and, spreading your narrative, to going to like UNM, for example, and hosting no false solutions workshops to educate, college students on why we cannot let these false solutions into our communities and how they continue to, perpetuate and uplift the fossil fuel industry. And so, a lot of this is a lot of groundwork, that falls under the People's Climate Plan, and last summer's People's Climate Plan Fellowship was really vital, to setting the foundation, for I think a lot of Yucca's work this past year. And so I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything to that. It's kind of ended up into like a big umbrella of Yucca's work, and so it's kind of hard to explain everything, but, yeah, I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah, I feel like one of the things for me, because I came into Yucca after like the initial planning had already been done for kind of what we wanted the People's Climate Plan campaign as a whole to look like. But I think over the past few months too, what makes this feel really like needed to me is also just knowing that even the times when folks are like theoretically trying to consult with our communities about bills that are being introduced, about getting their feedback on these specific kinds of solutions, even when we have community that's going to these town halls and forums, that's writing folks that are, pushing back against things like false solutions and really trying to advocate for what we would like to see instead. Also knowing that like even when that's happening, their voices still aren't being heard a lot of the time. And I think that's something that we've seen like broadly across, decision makers kind of at every level here in the state because we have so much industry influence behind closed doors. And so that's another piece that I think makes this super important and relevant in all of those different buckets. But yeah, just like drives home the urgency for me too.
Yeah. Yeah, so thanks y'all for sharing about the campaign. I think there's a lot to unpack here because just transition away from fossil fuels is a huge undertaking, right? Like we get this argument all the time when we talk about, hey, like let's end fossil fuels. Like, hey, let's end fossil fuels. And everyone's like, well, we can't. How are we gonna pay for everything? How are we gonna pay for our school system? Um, and it's a complex question, and that's why we're doing this campaign because we're trying to figure out the hard work that the state refuses to do. So yeah, and I know you mentioned false solutions briefly. I think that that is a really good example of the kind of deep rooted policy fights that we're up against in the New Mexico legislature and in the broader national climate policy space as well. So does someone want to define what false climate solutions are?
Yeah, I can define false solutions, and then if anyone else wants to add in, false solutions are ultimately solutions that seek to once again can uplift or continue the extraction of fossil fuels or of terrible industry in general. So, for example, um, one of the huge fall solutions that we're seeing in New Mexico, and we have seen in New Mexico for a minute, is hydrogen.
Mhm.
Um, we see this, it has a lot of different colors
Mhm.
to it. One of the things that we're seeing is green hydrogen in New Mexico. But it's hyped up as if it is a clean energy source. But in reality, it's not at all. It can't be mined or obtained without stripping it off of hydrocarbons. And so ultimately, what this means is that it's still produced from natural gas, and natural gas is still a fossil fuel. So it's a false solution.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of other, false solutions that are starting to gain way in New Mexico. Right now, I think we're a part of the No False Solutions Coalition, which is a coalition that seeks to um, destroy these narratives in our community. And so we're doing a lot of work right now to analyze why CCS or carbon capture and storage is a false solution. And I know Ennedith and Zoe probably know a lot more than I do about what's currently happening in New Mexico with CCS. But um, it's really bad because there's no evidence right now that we could actually um, do this. And so we don't know the repercussions just yet. And we don't know how it will impact ultimately our water, our land, our air. And another huge one, too, just to name another one, is nuclear power.
Mhm.
A lot of people and companies want us to believe that nuclear power is ultimately necessary to reduce greenhouse gases and to ultimately avert the climate crisis. But this is just simply not the truth. Nuclear is way too dirty, it's dangerous, it's too expensive, it's slow. And at every stage of production, it is, rooted in environmental injustice and human rights violations.
Mhm.
Just considering the uranium fuel chain alone, it makes the dangers of the climate crisis worse. And so we have to take that into consideration. And I think all of these conversations too, we also need to consider like a lot of the renewable energy sources, like renewable energy, with solar panels. We can't talk about these solutions without considering our folks in the global south who are at the forefront of mineral extraction to develop a lot of these things. So, in short, fall solutions are, solutions that fall solutions are solutions that aren't really solutions rooted in what the communities need. They're not rooted in the frontline communities' needs or wants. And they continue this exploitative extraction of our land, of our air, of our water, and they do more harm to our communities than good. And they're just false, they're fake, and they continue to, release carbon, but they're, termed as solutions because the companies that are creating them want us to think that they are real solutions when they're not. Kind of complicated, but
Mhm.
Yeah, and I would add that a lot of the false solutions we're seeing, at least here in New Mexico, and I would say on a global scale, is really prioritizing a lot of these corporations' profits over actual community led initiatives. So the idea that, hydrogen is going to be the new technology that we use to move away from fossil fuels is pretty deceptive, I would say, to the
Yeah.
public. And that's what false solutions are. They're deceiving the public knowingly, because they're not giving us all the information or all of the details. Like Felicia had said, in New Mexico, they're looking at green hydrogen, which is extremely water intensive, and at the moment, our Rio Grande has no water. Um, it's extremely water intensive. So, in order for that technology to be effective, not only is it going to require enormous amounts of water, but it may also possibly be mixed with fossil fuels, like Felicia had just mentioned. So, for the public, I would just urge you to look more into the details of what's being proposed in your community because you'll find that sometimes this technology doesn't work. Like hydrogen facilities have to be coupled with supposedly carbon capture facilities. So, a whole new facility to capture the CO2 that this hydrogen facility is going to emit. And they're going to suck the CO2 from the air and stick it in the ground. I'm sorry, but that logic is
Yeah.
beyond me. Like, what do you mean? If we're able to suck the contamination and pollution from the air, why hasn't that been done?
Yeah.
And not only that, why are we allowing those who have essentially, I would say, committed crimes against humanity
Yep.
tell us what's the way forward? What's the
Mhm.
path forward? Maybe they should focus on funding and remediating the harm they've already caused and cleaning up these polluted sites. Because frankly, just given the fact that there's so much pollution, so much harm that has been done that frankly has not been addressed, and low income and frontline workers and communities have needed to essentially deal with that brunt. And at the same time, they are championing themselves in policy spaces. I need to emphasize that specifically where decision makers are writing these laws for us, they're making that they're having a large influence in policy spaces to put this technology forward, right? Saying that this is what's needed, this is the way forward. But frankly, at the same time, ultimately dismissing actual community initiatives that people want to see be invested in and want to see taken into another level, a degree, instead of it just being a concept or an idea.
Yeah, and I think the other thing around kind of the public deception you were just talking about too is sometimes even when we're in policy spaces, I think something that makes us do like a double take at bills and things that are being pushed is when we're seeing like oil and gas lobbyists coming through and supporting legislation that maybe like initially doesn't even seem climate related, right? Maybe
Mhm.
it's kind of under the guise of business and economic development.
Right.
And I think that's something we see a lot, but I feel like the bottom line with all of these false solutions too is that right they're essentially scams being pushed by a dying industry that is really really desperate to continue to preserve their profits. And so that's why we see these false solutions like carbon capture and hydrogen that have the potential to do so much harm to our communities, and why we're seeing this being pushed by these companies and corporations that don't care at all about what the human impacts are for our people, that actually don't care about the efficiency of reducing emissions because their ultimate goal is to keep extending the life of this industry and their profits. And I think that's what we're seeing a lot here right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's so interesting, like, to see the, like, fakeness of these people. Like, we will be in the literally the same rooms as these, like, oil and gas lobbyists or, like, the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association, like, all of those corporations that are part of that. Like, they they have such a fake air about them that's, like, it's just so disturbing to see. And I remember when I first started doing this work, like, coming into the legislature, coming into, like, policymaking spaces, like, all, like, bright-eyed and, like, "We're the young people, we're gonna solve it," and, like, it feels like we've been just getting shat on every single legislative session. Like, there's always some new horrible, evil bill, or some horrible evil policy that a lot of the times is also tied in with good stuff too, like,
Mhm.
or it sounds really good on paper, like net zero by 2050 sounds great, right? But the science is calling for way more than that. Net zero does not actually mean zero. It means that they're gonna take the amount of emissions happening and subtract the quote unquote subtraction, the false solutions like carbon capture, carbon credits, carbon market schemes are another thing that we could do a whole other explanation on, but it's basically giving companies like credits, imaginary credits for polluting less. In reality, it does not stop emissions. It doesn't stop emissions at the source. Um, and then they'll subtract that until it reaches 0, quote unquote 0, and say, "We have net zero emissions. We're solving the problem." Like, and that's not real.
Mhm.
And having to explain that every year is very exhausting. So I think our goal with this campaign too is to kind of go beyond the policy making spaces that are so stuck in that, and go to our communities and say, "Hey, like this is what's happening, like this is what net zero means. This is what they're trying to push. And like what do you think about that?" And the response we've gotten is like, "No, fuck that." Like there was the hydrogen I-40 corridor that the state was really really trying to push, and they have a way with words. They really have a way with words. They'll paint a pretty picture, they'll call it clean green, like, those words are not they don't mean anything. You can put clean in front of everything. You can say clean nuclear energy, clean natural gas, even calling it natural gas, right? Like,
Mhm.
it's fake. It's all so fake.
Yeah, and I would like to add just like the level of influence that the oil and gas industry has over our policy making decisions. It's not just only an environmental and climate legislation where you see this influence being exerted, right? Like one of the things that, we've anticipated with the People's Climate Plan campaign has also been addressing people's immediate needs. Sometimes that means food, but sometimes that means shelter. It can mean having resources to potentially have people register for their school. It doesn't have to be solely environmental and climate focused.
Mhm.
But in my experience in the policy space and especially in the legislature, you'll see like big interests get in the way of things that would improve the quality of life of
Oh,
workers and everyday people, everyday New Mexicans.
yeah.
I'm by no way endorsed to talk about this, so I'm just talking about it as someone who has had experience trying to advocate for this bill, the Paid Family Medical Leave Act. It was insane to me that hundreds of business owners came out and said that they wouldn't be able to afford this. Meanwhile, we also have oil and gas actively going against this bill,
Mhm.
given the fact that they're a multi-billion-dollar industry. They don't want to give you sick leave, right? And just even simply like addressing those immediate needs or these issues that impact people's quality of life day to day in and day out. Um, you see them not only pushing these false solutions, but also shutting down initiatives that would just make things better for us, make, not having to lose your job because a family member got sick or because you need to go to a hospital and you need 6 weeks off to recover, you know? So there's these really big instances. There's just this large deception of the public that's happening. It's disgusting. And frankly, I would make the argument as well that it's derailing these so-called democratic processes, right?
Mhm.
It's lending into the hand of fascism. It's lending into the hand of our rights being stripped. And these big corporations are a big player in that. And so, like Sophia had said, like the People's Climate Plan campaign really is an initiative to start taking action ourselves because we're seeing multiple agencies, we're seeing state governments, we're seeing federal governments essentially ignore us,
Mhm.
essentially put our issues, our everyday lives in the back burner in the interest of corporate profit.
So, yeah, I think that a lot of people don't know where to start, right? When we talk about, okay, like community-led initiatives. Okay, well, we're the community. What are we leading? What are the initiatives? Where do we start, right? Like, I think there's a lot of like fear around getting involved in things like policy or even understanding policy, because when we start to really dive into things like fall solutions, there's so much to unpack. There's so many like economic random shit that like no one really understands. But I think the bottom line for us is like, okay, we're trying to make those connections, and we're trying to do the research and make it digestible and make it understandable and make it accessible. So what would y'all say is the best way that folks can get involved if they care about the climate?
Yeah, okay. I think this conversation has been, coming up a lot recently. It's like, how do we get folks involved in our movement? How do we Yeah, how do we get people to join, right? And I think quite simply, it's like we also need as a movement to meet people where they are, and so like as Ennedith was, talking about, sometimes that includes providing people with food, with housing, meeting their basic needs, and so I think that's one thing to like really important to consider when we're trying to bring people in first and foremost. But I think on a more general level, like more now more than anything, like we need people to get involved in any capacity
Mhm.
that they have. Like I think us on as an organization, it's like, okay, how do we get people off their couch who are, doom scrolling all day, and just feel like a bit hopeless? I think, as an organization, we're working on that. But we just really need to, pull people in any capacity that they have, whether they're an artist. We really need artists in our movement.
Mhm.
Whether, you're really good at making food, come make some food for our meetings. Whether you really wanna lead a direct action, that's exactly what we need, in Yucca in our capacity. So I just really am like, wanna say that, like, get involved in any way that you can. Yucca is actively recruiting, you know, um, if you don't necessarily wanna, join, environmental justice, there's a lot of other movements that you can join, in the state of New Mexico that are actively, recruiting members. But you don't always have to do something, that's, I guess, I don't know what the right word is, but, you can join like La Samia. They do a lot of hiking in the mountains. But their core foundation is like how to restore our relationship with the land and with Mother Earth. And I think joining in that capacity is also really vital, because once you have an understanding of your relationship with our non-human relatives, then you gain a better understanding for the world around you, and you fight harder to protect it as well. Um, so yeah, I think I just invite everyone to join something, whether, you go to city council meetings, whether you join an organization on your campus, whether, I will always for the rest of my life plug UNM Leaders for Environmental Action and Foresight. But if you're going to
Totally.
UNM, that's a organization that you can join on campus that focuses on pushing the University of New Mexico to divest from fossil fuels. Whether you get involved with Students for Justice in Palestine, like recognizing that we're such an intersectional movement as well, and so in any capacity that you have, join our movement because we're all collectively fighting for liberation. We're all collectively fighting for a just and better future. And so if, EJ necessarily isn't your thing, there's other um, points of pressure that you can join that will all collectively contribute to our capacity, to fight this government, to push our solutions, our demands further. So that's just my advice, is to get involved in any capacity that you have, whether that's 1 hour, whether that's 5 minutes, whether that's like taking time to talk or email one of us. Just any capacity that you have, we need you. And so I'm just really urging everyone to just show up and to just be involved.
Yeah, I think Felicia made really good points too about like how many different ways there are to really plug into the movement. I think what I'll really emphasize too, though, is especially in these policy spaces, especially in a state where oil and gas has also dominated the like cultural narrative for so long too. I think we need our community's voices and stories in these spaces. So whatever that means to you, right? Like Felicia mentioned, whether that's you're going to a city council meeting and you're doing public comment, or maybe that's you're like making a video and sharing your story about what your life has looked like being impacted by oil and gas. Like there's so many different ways that we can share our stories, share the impacts that we're seeing from this kind of continued extraction, but also counter that narrative that has been running and really, like Ennedith has been saying, like deceiving our communities for so long. And it's on us to counter that. We need to be in those spaces. We cannot allow like the policy space, the media space to be dominated solely by oil and gas and their
Mhm.
lobbyists and their allies that are in positions of power. And so I think I would just really emphasize to folks that like your story is also more powerful than you think it is and is a really, really key part of how we keep the work moving forward and how we're also educating others about the importance of all of these different intersectional issues that we're working around.
Yeah, and I would add, plugging in the campaign that Yucca intentionally has left some funding to potentially support people's efforts and having and hosting these conversations. One thing that we have is like this house party invitation and budget. And the idea is that if you have a group of friends or you have just simply community members and you all want to get together and have these conversations or to potentially do like some political education where you're reading books, you're studying, you're analyzing these things. Yucca more than happy to sponsor these events. So give you the necessary funds to be able to successfully hold and host these spaces and potentially also support you in planning these things because we want people to be having these conversations with folks who potentially may not know the concept of a just transition but are recognizing that the river's dry or that we're going to potentially be hitting 3-degree digit weather soon or that they themselves have experienced a flood, right? If you want to do efforts around mutual aid, and I know Zoe is a champ, a movement leader when it comes to mutual aid work, um, then, plug you into those networks. But what we really do emphasize is the importance of your story, your narrative, and putting that at the forefront of this fight against these private and corporate interests. Because frankly, as much as they try to shape and paint this pretty picture of the oil and gas industry or extractive mineral industries or even just the military industrial complex, there are real experiences and truths to people's I already said this, but experiences. There are lived experiences that have value and should be valued. And as young people, we emphasize the need to put that at the forefront because that this is what really makes real change. It's not private money, it's not $500 meals with a legislator. It's the experiences that people have in the workplace. It's the experiences that this family who has been struggling with asthma um, is one being resilient, but also having to fight for their existence. It's these stories that really make the necessary transformation and change that we want to see for the world. And we've seen it time and time again. It play out in our history. And now we're at a moment where it has to happen again, where we have to challenge these 1% interest, this 1% power hold, because at this point, it's coming at the brink of our humanity. And are we going to allow that or are we going to be pushing back?
Yeah. I wanna ask Zoe to talk about mutual aid and how folks can get involved, at least in Albuquerque.
Yeah, so I would say on that end, jumping off of what you were just saying too, I think just to like make the connection for folks also, like how is mutual aid a way that we can counter that narrative and that culture? And I think what it comes back to is when community members are stepping up for each other in this way in terms of providing each other with networks of support and also the basic resources that we need to survive and to feed our families and to, continue to pay our bills. I think in a lot of ways, what that's showing our communities and our families is that there is another way for us to support and sustain each other without all of this money and funding from industry. And I think it's really reaffirming and reminding folks that we've got each other, regardless of the money that we're trying to kind of do away with from industry, regardless of anything else, in terms of if our decision makers and folks in power aren't hearing our voices, like we are still going to step up and be there for each other. And I think that's the key piece of mutual aid efforts in terms of um, advancing climate justice. And so I think in Albuquerque right now, I will say I used to do a lot of work with Albuquerque Mutual Aid, especially when things were first kind of getting going at the start of the pandemic. And that's one kind of resource and ongoing, very much by the community for the community project here in Albuquerque that I would encourage folks to get involved with. I think that can look like a lot of different things, and I'm not as plugged into kind of what their structure is lately, but in the past, I know that that's looked like going and helping to package like care packages and resources for folks. I know that in the past, that's looked like actually delivering those to people at their homes, or looked like creating forums and social media and helping to fundraise for those efforts. So I would say there's a lot of different ways to get involved in Albuquerque, especially. And I will say they have a very active presence on like social media and their own website as well, where I think you can sign up for some kind of orientation and initial trainings. And so would definitely encourage folks to get involved in that route too.
Yeah, totally. I think there's a lot of resources on social media. So like we talked a little bit about the floods in Rio Doso. That's gonna kind of continue to be a need, right? Like so many places in New Mexico have been burnt down by fires, and the natural consequence after that is that when it rains, it floods. So there's pretty much always resources on our Instagram at yucca.nm. And then I also think about like NM Climate Justice always has updates on mutual aid. There's I know there's donation drives happening right now. There's a lot of stuff. Tr- Folks are trying to get supplies and support down to Ruidoso from Albuquerque and Santa Fe. Um, yeah, I think mutual aid is one of those concepts that's kinda scary to people, you know? It's like, "Oh, socialism. Oh, like, like, you're so radical," like but no, it's like, this is what we need, you know? It's like, I'm out of eggs. I'm gonna go knock on my neighbor's door. "Do you have an egg I can borrow?" You know what I mean? Like, it's that. It's, starting a community garden. It's starting a book club. It's literally just talking to your friends and family. That's what mutual aid is, and I think that's what, like, the society we're trying to build is. And that's what a just transition is too, is mutual aid, is reciprocity, is caring for each other, is challenging the systems that we've always lived under, which is hard, right? It's really hard. Like, yeah, I gotta pay my bills. I have to have a cell phone, right? Like, but I think a just transition is so much bigger than that. And climate justice means so much more than just stopping carbon emissions. It means shifting our lifestyle. It means shifting the way that we interact with each other and with the earth. And yeah, there's a lot more we could unpack. But yeah, does anyone have more to add?
Yeah, someone this weekend had told me mutual aid is just human nature, right? And so it really is human nature in the sense of where, you're supporting your neighbor, your friend, your family member, and it's really doing it without the expectation of something in return,
Mhm.
without the expectation of it being an in debt. It's you helping someone you care about or even simply a stranger just because you want to offer that resource or that support. And a lot of times I think capitalism has shamed us from asking for help
Mhm.
despite the fact that a lot of people's struggles are institutional, they are intentional policy decisions. Mutual aid is really just pushing back against these systems, these institutions. It's human nature to support each other, to be there for your friend, your neighbor, your community member. And I would highly encourage that if folks want to start doing some badass work, this could be your starting point, right? It doesn't have to be extravagant, big, or grand, but as long as the effort is there, the intention is there, and you are recognizing and learning through trial and error, then the revolution's there too.
Yeah, so in talking about mutual aid and just transition, people's climate plan, um, we still have our survey. We talked about this a little bit. if you can find it on our website and at the link in our Instagram bio. It's kind of a long survey. We're also working on holding more community events, and reach out to us anytime also is a huge thing. Like DM us on Instagram, email us. Our email is yucca@earthcarenm.org. Um, there's a lot of ways that folks can get involved with this campaign. I think that we're still very much like creating it. But the survey is a really good place to start. We also wanted to start kind of like a community interview series. So, like, come join us for the podcast, like, do an interview. Like, if you have something to say, and I know you do, like, let us know. And we're trying to gather those stories and create it into a plan that people want to see. That's the People's Climate Plan.
Yeah, and I think on the survey, I know there's a specific question like asking folks if they're open to doing follow-up interviews about the thoughts that they're sending us. And I think that's something we're really wanting to try to build up, but also trying to make things accessible for folks where like we know that sometimes you don't want to sit down and take a survey for 30 minutes. And so if that means you need to DM us on Instagram and we can sit down and do a verbal interview about what you're wanting to see in this kind of legislation and in these kinds of solutions. I think that's something we're glad to do. Like Sophia was mentioning, we're trying to really bring the voices of our communities, not just even Yucca members, but our communities more broadly to the forefront through these kinds of like video interviews and social media campaigns and things like that too. So if that's something you're interested in getting involved with and making your voice heard, definitely reach out to us because we are always looking for folks to participate in those kinds of things. Yeah.
I would also add that we have an intentionally developed workshop series under the People's Climate Plan campaign. And I am at the moment only remembering the first one, but I know there's about five of them. And the very first one is the People's Poetry Workshop. And the idea and concept about this is helping you find your voice, helping you reflect on your experiences and what it is that you value. Is it your family? Is it your friends? Is it your history? Is it nature? Is it the land? What is it that you value and what is it that you want to protect and you find worth protecting, right? And so that's our first introductory and part of our political education series is this workshop. We also have one on movement history. We have one specifically on the People's Climate Plan campaign. And so Yucca is more than willing to help you develop workshops that are fitting for your community and your community's needs and to really try to kickstart this conversation. So if you're like, let's say in Cuba, New Mexico, and you're like, I want a workshop, our young people will go out there and give this workshop and help build it with you. So we also offer that as potentially a way to get engaged. The street interviews are another one that we're really trying to emphasize. We also have the podcast, the survey. If you're an artist, a photographer, and you want to paint us a banner, you want to help us create a graphic, or you want to come out and take pictures of our direct actions, you're more than welcome to do that. If you're a scientist with research and you want to hand it over to young people to do something with it, we're more than happy to brainstorm what that action can be as a result of your research. If you're a policymaker and you really want to push against the grain that you're seeing right now with the Democratic Party or with the rise of fascism, reach out to us. Our people want to really take action and really put this at the forefront because we got us, right? Nobody else is going to help save us. So this is really the intention and the initiatives of the People's Climate Plan campaign.
And I would say too, if you're like still hearing all of these options and you're like, okay, maybe none of this feels quite right for what I'm wanting to do, or maybe I need some more help, like brainstorming about other ways I could plug in, I would just say, please reach out to us. Like, we're always happy to jump on the phone or talk over email and try to figure out how to get you involved in the work because I think we know this is truly going to take everyone. And so we want to create as many paths as possible for folks to join us. I would say our email is yucca@earthcarenm.org. If you reach out to us there, we can have a conversation with you, bring you into the work in a way that feels best with you. So I would just encourage folks to reach out. Even if you're not 100% sure what you want your role to look like yet, there is definitely space for everyone in this work and everyone is needed as well.
Felicia, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just think recognizing that this is the biggest threat of our generation. And so, to Zoe's and Ennedith's point, like we really need everyone involved. We need really good people who are doing really great work in any sector of, whether you're an engineer, whether you're a biologist. We need everyone to be involved in any way, in any capacity. And so just really emphasizing that, your voice and your story is important, and we want to elevate that as much as we can. And we want to get you involved in any way that we can as well. And so please definitely do reach out. Anyone here, anyone else in Yucca would be more than willing to, sit down with you or anyone else who is interested to figure out different points of avenues to join Yucca, to join different movements, to join our People's Climate Plan. If you, want to host a house party, also reach out to us. If you have an idea for how to gather community and talk about these things, reach out to us. Like we travel all over the state, honestly. And we're more than willing to go the extra mile, to talk to your community, to brainstorms ways of, like, for example, if you want to start an environmental organization at your high school, like we can help you start that. We really just want to broaden our capacity and broaden, the way that we reach people. And so that includes all of us. And it's all under this umbrella of the campaign. So please do reach out. Don't hesitate to ask, because we have resources and we just want to be able to equip our young people to deal with the biggest threat of our generation. So
Yeah, so the Pupils Climate Plan, the tagline we essentially have for it is friends organizing friends, neighbors organizing neighbors, and us building a movement. So, as Zoe and Feleecia and Sofia have said, there's many different avenues to connect to. All it takes is really that first step. And from there, your world and your essentially your action will broaden.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah, thank you all so, so much. Real quick before we end, I just wanted to mention we were kind of waving this booklet around earlier when we were talking about false solutions. This is a zine workbook research compilation, I guess, called Hoodwinked in the Hothouse. Shout out Hoodwinked in the Hothouse. This is a workbook that is in a lot of different languages. There's printed versions that you can order, and there's also free online PDFs that you can find. It's called Hoodwinked in the Hothouse: Resist False Solutions to Climate Change. So this was kind of created by Climate Justice Alliance, Just Transition Alliance, Indigenous Climate Action, Indigenous Environmental Network, a lot of those organizations. And it's a compilation of like, okay, let's break it down. Like, what are carbon markets? What are carbon pricing schemes? Why is it false? Why are we being hoodwinked? So we're gonna link this in the description. Um, and if you ever want a copy of it, we do own some English and Spanish copies of Hoodwinked in the Hothouse. And we also, speaking of fall solutions, like folks said, reach out to us for anything. But we do offer specific, fall solutions trainings. There's multiple day-long trainings, there's hour-long trainings. So if you are a teacher, if you're an organizer, if you have a really cool group of friends, like let us know. We can come give you a training for free. I'll highlight that. You will never have to pay us for anything. So yeah, does anyone have anything else to add before we close out?
it is not a time to mourn, it is a time to organize. So let's all organize in our communities.
Awesome. Thanks so much for listening. This was the Yapping with Yucca podcast. Make sure and like and subscribe, rate us on Spotify or Apple Music or wherever you're listening. That helps get this out to more people. Follow us on Instagram and stay in touch.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks,
Everyone.
y'all.
Thank you.